Hi and welcome to this DCP web tutorial. In today's tutorial we're going to use Blender 2.8 beta to create a 3D text animation. So the end result will look something similar to this. So let's just play this example. And we're going to use Blender to create this, and you can use your own text here, so it doesn't have to say DCP web. You can say your name, your company name, whatever you like, and you'll be able to change the colors and change like the glow effect. You can do loads of different stuff in your example of this video animation text. So let's just play it one more time. We'll close this and we'll continue with the tutorial. So the first thing we'll do is open up our web browser, and we'll go to this website and you can pick any font you want. I would suggest picking something that's quite thick and strong type font like this. This one here, this one here, this one here will be fine. Any of these sort of fonts here, you can scrub through them, have a look at them. There's loads of them here, and just find a font you like. I'm going to pick this one here. I think that one, I like the shapes of the letters here. So I'm going to download that font, and I'll open up this folder and I'll drag and drop the font into here. Close this down, right click here, and I'll extract the zip file, and then we'll delete this zip file, and we can delete these two files, and we're left with these two fonts here. So let's open up Blender 2.8 beta version, and if you haven't got this installed on your machine, I'll put a link in the YouTube description so that you can follow the instructions and install the software. So this is what you're presented with when you first load up Blender 2.8 beta. And we're going to click on General here for now. And this is a beginner's tutorial. And in all honesty, I'm a beginner at this as well. So I'm going to try my best to explain what I'm doing as I'm learning this tool and this software. I haven't used it for a very long time, and a lot has changed, especially between this version and the last version. I would definitely recommend you download this 2.8 version and start familiarizing yourself with this particular interface, because a lot of things have changed between this version 2.8 and 2.7, and this is actually a lot easier to use than 2.7. So like usual, the first thing we should do is go File, Save As. And I'm going to go to my desktop, go into this folder, and we'll call this 3D text-01.blend. And we're going to use the 01 to represent the first version. And as we go along this tutorial, we're going to create different versions based on save points. So when we know that we've done something, we like it, and we're happy with it, we'll save it as that particular version. So let's click on Save. And this is a beginner's tutorial. So I do know quite a few things now, and when you load up Blender, this is what you're going to first see. You can see a cube, you can see a light source here, and you can see a camera. And if you look at your keyboard, so I've got a picture of this keyboard and a mouse. This is very similar to what I have on my desktop right now. And let's just focus on the mouse right now. So the mouse has got, obviously it's got a left mouse button and a right mouse button. You've got the mouse wheel, so when you're scrolling on web pages or whatnot, if I zoom in and out of this image, we can use the mouse wheel to zoom in and out. And the middle mouse wheel is also a button as well. Not everyone knows that, but you can actually press this mouse wheel down, and that is actually a button in its own right. So if we go back to the website, or sorry, if we go back to Blender, and if we hold down the middle mouse button, we can rotate around the scene. We're rotating around this 3D cursor here in the middle, right? So we hold down the middle mouse button to rotate around objects. So familiarize yourself with that. Pause the video, just hold down that middle mouse button and move the mouse left and right while holding down the mouse button, and you can move around an object like this, nice and simple. So that's the first thing. Now sometimes we want to zoom in and out, so we just use the mouse wheel on its own. So as we move the mouse wheel out, it will zoom out, and as we move it in, it will zoom in. So use the mouse wheel to zoom in and out, hold it down to rotate. Now the last thing you want to know is if you hold down the shift key on your keyboard, so we hold down the shift key and use the middle mouse button as well at the same time. So when we hold down shift and use the middle mouse button, we can pan around. We can pan around the object. So we use the middle mouse to rotate, hold down the shift key as well, and we can pan around the objects like this. We can move up and down, left and right. Okay, so I would suggest you pause the video and just play around, just rotate around the object, get familiarized with that, hold down the shift key and use the middle mouse button to pan around, and then use the middle mouse wheel to zoom in and out, and you're good to go. So let's rotate around to sort of this angle. This is the original angle we started off with. The camera was here, the object was here, and the light source was here. Now let's render out our first image. So what we're going to do is hit the F12 key here. So let's press F12 on our keyboard, and this cube that's been rendered is one frame, we can say, or one picture. And you can see there's light at the top and light on the side, and it's dark on this side. And that's all to do with the position of the light source. So the light source is over here somewhere, so it's hitting the top, it's hitting the side, but it can't hit as much on this side because the light source is over here somewhere, right? And the camera is looking at this object from here. So if you look at the camera, if we rotate around a bit, this is the back of the camera, and you can see the square here is pointing towards the object, and this is the light source. And the light source is going to be hitting this side, the top side, and a bit of this side, but much less of this side. That's why you see when we press F12, it's much darker here. Blender is all about lights. Lights are all about giving objects their 3D feel, right? So lights are very important in Blender. Okay, so the first thing we do is click on this object. So left click on this square, or this cube, let's call it a cube. Let's left click on it and let's zoom out a little bit, and we hit the delete key. So just go to your keyboard and hit this delete key to get rid of that object. Then we're going to press Shift and A. So hold down your Shift key and then press the letter A, Shift and A. And from all of these options, these are all the different types of things we can add to Blender. I haven't learned them all. There's loads of different things in here you can play around with, but for now we're just going to go to Mesh and Plane. And we see this little square here. This is going to become our stage. So we want to scale this up. It's too small at the moment. So we're going to press S on our keyboard, the letter S, and then we're going to type in 10, 1, 0. And then it's going to scale it up, and we're going to hit the Enter key, and that will accept that scale. We just scaled it up by 10 times, right? Now, and you can see that here, right here, scale, you can see. Now, what we want to do, this is like the floor of our stage. We can consider this to be the floor, but we want a backdrop here behind it. And to do that, we're going to extrude. We're going to do something called extrusion. Extrude. And to do that, we need to hit the tab key on our keyboard. There's two ways to do this. I'm going to show you both ways. So this is the tab key. And the tab key allows us to go between object mode and edit mode. So we have to understand that. So if we click on this object, we know it's selected because it's got this yellow border around it, or this orange border. And when we hit the tab key, let's hit the tab key, then we go into something called edit mode. Can you see edit mode here? And if we click on this drop down, you'll see object mode and edit mode, these two options. These are the ones we're going to focus on. So we can click on object, then we're manipulating the object itself. In edit mode, we can manipulate the object on its by its vertices, or by its face, or by vertices are these little dots in the corner, or by the edges. And we want to manipulate this object by its edge. So we're going to click on here. Can you see edge? This middle option here. And we're going to click on this edge right here. And everything else will go black around the borders, and this edge will be white. If you look at this 3D sort of cursor up here, you can see Z represents the vertical, and the red, this red line represents the horizontal, and basically the X, the Y, and the Z. Yeah, that's what we're saying. You can see that here, and you can see the lines already here, X and Y and Z, and that's represented here as well. So we want to extrude upwards, so we're going to press E on our keyboard, the letter E, and then we're going to press the letter Z, and this blue line will appear. And if we move our mouse up, we can move it up and down, and we're going to extrude like this. Instead of guessing what we're extruding, we're going to just press 10 to make it 10. And then we'll hit the enter key. Now we've got a floor, and now we've got this wall at the back. Okay, we can rotate the object around, so we hold down the middle mouse button, we can rotate it around like this. Now, the next thing we're going to do is click again on this line here. We'll click on it one more time, and we're going to move our mouse to around here. So try and move your mouse cursor to this point here, and we're going to press Control and B for Bravo, Control B, and we're going to move our mouse wheel up, and that's going to create this bevel edge. This is like a bevel, we can call it, yeah? And we're going to have it around this sort of size here. And then we're going to use the mouse wheel, so move your mouse wheel upwards, and it's going to create segments. We're going to create about this many segments. There's 6 there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You can create 6 or 8 or 4. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to do 6. And then we're going to left click. And that will accept it. Now we're going to hit the tab key, or we can go to edit mode here and press object mode. Try and remember that tab key. That tab key becomes very useful, right? To move between object mode and edit mode. So right now we want to be in object mode. And we're going to hold down our middle mouse button and rotate around the object to around here. And can you see these like segments are in different colors, right? So this is we want to smooth this out. So we're going to go to object, and we're going to go to shade smooth. Click that, and now you can see it's nice and smooth. Let's go to file, save. Now we've created our stage. This is like our stage. Okay, you can see in the background here it's all like a grey color, and we can change this. This is what we call the world settings. So we're going to click on this option here, the world, and we're going to click on this grey option here, the color, and we're going to drag it all the way down to make it black. And that's what we're going to do for now. And that will make it, when we render, that will make sure, it's a bit hard to see at the moment because the camera's pointing here, but anything we render in the background here will be black. It should be in theory. We're going to test that later. Okay, so one thing you need to do, if you're on I assume you're on a PC, but if you're on a laptop, you want to go to Edit, Preferences, and you want to make sure Emulate Numpad is selected here. Tick that off, and then click Save Preferences, and then close this. The reason why is on my keyboard I've got the numpad here, and if you don't have that on your laptop, then you can emulate the functions here to the number keys across here. So they'll both, if you've got a desktop computer, they'll both do the same thing now, but if you've got a laptop, then you don't have this numpad, you can emulate them here. That's what that option does. So what we want to do is press the number 7 key on our keyboard, number 7. And that takes us to the top view. It's called top orthographic here. And we're looking down onto the canvas now, you could say, or down onto this stage from the top. And we're going to press Shift and A. And we're going to go to text and add a text object. And we want to use our mouse wheel to zoom in a little bit. And we hold down the Shift key and use the middle mouse to pan it down so we can see this text here. And we're going to press the Tab key, because the Tab key allows us to go into edit mode. So Tab. Now we can delete this text. Use the backspace key on our keyboard to delete it. And I'm going to type in DCP Web. You can type in anything you like. Maybe your first name, maybe your last name, maybe your company name. That's my company name, DCP Web. And then try and keep this text quite short. You don't want it to be too long. So a nice short word, maybe Christmas, anything you like really, something nice and short. So we're going to hit the Tab key one more time, and that puts us back into object mode. So now we have our text, but the text is quite plain and boring. So that's why we downloaded that font before. So we're going to go to the font option here, Object Data, which is what it's called, Object Data. And we're going to go to Font. And then we're going to click on this Open folder here, this one here. And we're going to click that, and we'll select one of these two. I think this bottom one is italic because it's got IT. and this top one is not non-italic. So I'm going to select this top one, the one without the IT, this one here, and click open font. Now you can see the text is much different. It's using that font for the text. Okay. So the next thing I want to do is go to this transform. So we want to click transform here, make sure it's open. And we're going to set the size to be about, I'm going to set it to exactly 2.000, this size. So if you set your size, if you've got a lot more characters, I've got 6 in total. So you see there's 6 characters. If you've got maybe 8 or 10 characters, then you want to make it a lot less. You don't want to make it so big. But we can change this later, so don't worry about it too much. But if you've got around 6 to 8 characters, then 2 should be fine, yeah? 2.000. So the next thing we want to do is center out this text in this 3D cursor. So we'll go to Object, Set Origin, and Geometry to Origin. Click that option, and now you can see the text is centered on the 3D cursor here. So we can hold down the Shift key and use the middle mouse button again and just pan the screen across. Now we've got our text. Let's go to File, Save. And we're going to hold down the middle mouse button and we're going to just drag it so that we can see it at an angle. Hold down the Shift key and you can pan it around, and we just want to zoom in so we can see it at an angle like this. And we're going to click on the Move tool and we're just going to drag it up a bit. We want to drag it up to something like this here. If you see that it's now sitting above the floor, it's above the floor. And the next thing we'll do is go back to this object data. We'll scroll up and we'll go to geometry here. And in the extrude, we're going to extrude the text to something like 0.1. Can you see that? It's a thicker text. And we're going to zoom in quite close. So use your mouse wheel to zoom in and just hold down the Shift key to pan it across. So really play around with that shift. So if you want to pause the video right now and just experiment with the rotate and then hold down the Shift key and use the middle mouse wheel to pan around and then use the mouse wheel to zoom in and out. Because you really need to sometimes get close into these objects to see what's going on. So we want to zoom into maybe this letter P here. And we want to see the edging, right? The edge around this letter P. Because what we're going to do now is going to affect all of the letters. But let's look at one that's got a rounded edge. It doesn't really matter to be honest which letter. Because we're going to set the bevel. And we're going to set the bevel depth to 1. And we're going to set the resolution to 1 as well. And that puts a nice little like rounded edge around the all of this font, all of this text here. So let's zoom out again. So we use the mouse wheel to zoom out, and we can rotate around and we can see we've got this nice beveled edge. It's not so apparent now, but later when we start to add light sources, you'll see the light reflecting off those edges. It will look nice. Okay, let's zoom right out so we can see the whole text here. And the problem we have right now is the text is laying flat on this stage and we want to rotate the text. So the text is already selected. And one thing to note here quickly, there's this scene collection here. So this is a bit like, if you're familiar with Photoshop, you can think of this like layers almost. And we can open up this arrow here and we can see the camera, the light source, the plane, which is like the stage, and the text. So whichever one we click on here will select that object in the scene. So we want to click on the text one, which was selected before, but I just want to show you that you can use these to select objects. Let's go to File, Save. Let's go to File, Save As, and this time we're going to save it as version 2. Because we've done some work and I quite like what we've done at version 1 at this stage. So let's save it as version 2. And let's click Save. Okay, we want to rotate this text. So what we want to do is we want to go to Object here. And this little 3D cursor up here really helps us quite a lot. Because we want to rotate it to be facing upwards, you could say. It's a bit hard to explain, but we want to rotate it on the x-axis. So you can see scale, you can see rotation. So X here, we'll click inside and we'll set it to 90 degrees. And hit enter. Now it's standing up tall, you could say, yeah? and we can just use our middle mouse wheel, and then we can see the text is sitting here. If we zoom in, it's quite close. It's almost like literally touching the floor here. We want to move it up a little bit. We don't want it so close to the, we want it close to the floor, but not too close. We want a gap there underneath. It's a little bit hard to see, but we should have a gap here now, yeah? On the side, yep, we can see a gap there. Okay, we can move it around afterwards, no problem. Okay, now let's go to file save. Always save your work as you go. We'll hold down the shift key and we can pan around a little bit. We just want to get this text into perspective where we can start editing it a little bit more. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is rotate it around so you can see it like on this horizontal like this, and we're going to press Shift and D for delta. Shift D, and that makes a copy of this text, and we're going to hit enter. Now you can see there's two copies here. We'll click on the bottom one and we'll use this green arrow to drag it back, so we've got two copies now, and we want a little bit of a gap in between them, but we'll sort that out in a moment. So we just want to drag it back so they're separated, and then we want to go back to this object data, and we want to make sure the bottom one is selected, which is the one in the back, and we want to set the extrude all the way down to 0.01. So we want to make this really thin. You can see how thin it is now. You can see there's quite a big gap here, so we want to just drag it so there's a tiny gap there, not a tiny one, you know, enough to see something like this. So sometimes it's hard to see, so you've got to rotate around and you've got to zoom in to see what's going on. You can see the gap here, right there. That's what we want. Okay, let's press Control S on our keyboard, and that will save our work. And this is the camera here, so let's just see what the camera is kind of looking at the text. So let's press F12, and now we can see our text here rendered out. So it's not looking amazing. We're going to sort that out in a moment. We're going to add some lights to it and some colors and just make it look a bit better. So let's do that next. Okay, and we'll sort out the camera position, so it's looking at this a bit more better, you could say. So let's zoom in on this text. We'll middle mouse click and rotate around, and this time we want to select the top one. So we're selecting the text at the front, and we're going to go to the material here, and we're going to create a new material, and we're going to select whatever color we like. So what we need to actually do for, in fact we'll pick the color. I want to pick like a, almost like a red pink sort of color, something like this. And you can see right now, you can't see that color in this scene here. We need to select this option up here. This is the render option. So up here you've got wireframe, you've got solid, you've got 3D view, and then you've got render view. So this is the render view, right? You can start to see some of the purple colors coming through here. Can you see as we rotate around? The problem is, if we zoom out a little bit, this light source is behind the object. And remember I said lighting is really important. So right now we're lighting up the back of the object, whereas we want to light up the front of it. So we're going to hit the number 7 on our keyboard. That takes us to the top view. And we zoom out a little bit. We can click on this light source, and we've got the move tool already set. And this is where you've got to be a little bit careful. You want to click on like the outside. You don't want to click on the green or the red or the center. You want to click on a little bit on the outside here. Then you can drag this light source to wherever you want. I want to drag it in front of the object, just to lighten it up. And we'll sort out the lights a little bit better later. But for now, at least we're lighting up the front of the object. Now we can see it, right? You can see the color clear. And we might zoom out a little bit, and we can use the blue to drag it down. And you can see how the light can really, see if we drag it all the way down here, the light's pretty much disappeared. If we drag it up, you can see how that's affecting, and it's dropping the shadow, and it's doing a lot of things to this scene. And we can move the light backwards, right? And you can see how it's affecting the shadow. And this is all done in real time. So this is why Blender is really powerful. We're quite fortunate that we're using this version of Blender. Before, this was quite difficult to do in real time in Blender. It had a different render engine. One thing to note, if we click here in render, we're using a render engine called EEVEE at the moment. There's two different ones. There's Cycles, and Cycles is very powerful, but it's quite time consuming in terms of rendering out a scene. It's very powerful, in fact. But for now, we're just going to stick with EEVEE, because we can render in real time in this scene and we can see a lot of the things that are happening. So maybe we'll look at Cycles at another time, but for now we use this EEVEE render engine. Okay, so we'll leave the light source around here. So if we press 7 on our keyboard, we can see roughly where it is now, right? You can see it's in front of the object about this sort of distance. And if we middle mouse click and pan around, we can move it down or up, and we want to have it around this sort of height here. So you can play around with that. You just want to illuminate the front of this text so we can see it clearly. That's the objective. Okay. Now let's go to File, Save, and we want to click on this text here. Hold down the Shift key. I'm not sure if we can do this. We should be able to, but let's click on this bottom text and let's click on the one above it, holding down the Shift key. So when we hold the Shift key, we can see we selected both of them, and in theory we should be able to, yeah, we can drag both at the same time. So we don't want it too low, and we don't want it too close to the floor. We want to bring it up a little bit more to something like this. So you can see there's a gap now here, because that will allow us to get better shadow effects and stuff like that later. So let's rotate around and zoom in a little bit. So we'll move it up a little bit, and we'll rotate to this side, something like this. This will be good. Let's get in a bit closer, actually, around here. Okay, let's go to File, Save. The next thing I want to do is work with this text in the back. Can you see the text in the back? So we've got this text in the front and we've got the one in the back. So that's the top one here, I believe. Let's just double check. Let's just rotate around. So it's the one at the bottom, actually. So that makes sense. The one at the top is the text in the front, and the one below it is the text behind. So with the text behind selected, we want to go to Material, add another new material, and this time we're going to select Emission here. And we're going to select a different color. We're going to do like a, you can choose whatever colors you want, right? So don't follow my colors. You can pick whatever colors you want for the front or the back. I'm going to use like a purple color. And I'm going to increase the strength of the emission to maybe, let's say it's around 2.4. We can play around with this afterwards. Okay, now let's sort out this this floor. So this floor is way too light. I don't want it to be this light. I want it to be much darker. So if we click on the floor anywhere, you'll see it's highlighted around the edge, or you can click on the plane here. Click plane here. Click on new material. So we're going to create a material for that one. So we're in the material option here. We'll click here, and we will drag this down to darken it. In fact, what we'll do, let's try, we'll click surface here, right? And let's try and set it to something like glossy. Okay, we'll set it to glossy, and then we'll reduce the darkness of it. You can play around with this. There's no golden rule here. Something like this. And then we're going to go to render here. Let's click this render option. We'll zoom in on this text a little bit so we can see it a bit clearer. Let's go to File, Save, and we're going to tick Ambient Inclusions. We're going to tick Bloom, Surface Scattering, screen space reflection, motion blur, and volumetrics. And look what that did to our text. It turned it from something really iffy to now it looks like it's neon glowing. Looks nice, right? We can play around with this surface to affect the way that this text, like reflections, and do all this good stuff to this text. So really what we want to do is click on this light source. Let's bring the light source down a little bit, and you see as the light source gets closer, it affects the text, the way it looks. We can do really nice stuff, like we could zoom out a little bit here. When we animate this later, we could have the text like this, and the light source could come flowing across the text and highlight it like this. We can do all sorts of effects using lights and the way that we position the lights and the strength of them, and loads of different things we can do. But for now, we're just going to drag the light up a little bit. We don't want it to be too close. Maybe down a little bit, something like this. And what we're going to do is try and get your text to be sort of in this sort of position here. Something like this in perspective, yeah? Then you're going to hold down the Control, the Alt key, and press 0. So Control, Alt, and 0. And that will move the camera to what you can see here. So now you can see this box around here. So this is the camera. And now the camera can see exactly what you just basically looking at previously, right? But you can see the box is a bit out, so that this part of the text is going to be cut off. It's not to worry about it right now, but it'll be nice to see when we render, we can see everything. So what we do is we'll go to the object data here, object, and we can move, let's make sure we select the camera here on the top, right camera here. And we can move it to the side a little bit. We can move it out a little bit. Move it to the side a bit more. Now we can see the whole text, and maybe we'll move it down a little bit here to something like this. Let's go File, Save, and let's press F12. Now we can see our text rendered out, and it looks much better than it did before. You can see like the illumination of the text behind. That's why we had two copies of that text. When our normal text here, and then we have this illumination. It's looking a bit blurred out and stuff, so we need to play around with the lights and the light sources, and we can do loads of more stuff on this this text here to improve it. So I think that's going to be the end of this first part of this tutorial. In the next part, we'll improve the lighting, and we'll improve the surface so we get better reflections. Possibly we may even turn the reflections off. There's no golden rule, like I said, to Blender. It is what it's a blank canvas, isn't it? So you can make the font any color you want. You can make the light source any color you want. We can click on this light source here, and we can go to the light source here, and we can change it to a completely different color, and that will affect the text quite dramatically, you see. So we can have it like a neon sort of blue, and that the light source is going to affect really quite heavily. If we leave it in the center, that's white, so then the text will just be its natural sort of color. We can really play around with this light source to affect how this text looks. So we can play around with that later. Yeah, we can experiment with that later. We can have multiple light sources. We can have like a red and a green text, or a red light and a green light. We can really play around with it. We can change quite a lot of the options here, like the specular. That will get rid of this this glow on the floor. We don't really want that, so we should really set the specular to 0, I would say. And then the radius, we can change that, and that will affect how that affects the text and this thing called bloom, right? So if we render this now, it's looking a bit better now. Now we haven't got this specular on the floor here. So we can play around with these light settings. Maybe for now, click on the light source and then set the specular to 0, and then you can increase or decrease the radius, and that will affect how this this text is illuminated. Let's just go to File, Save. Go to File, Save As, and save it as version 3. And what I would like you to do, So between now and the next tutorial that I create, you can just go and experiment with this. You've got a version 3 now, right? So you can do anything you want with that version 3. Because when we come back and do the next stage of this tutorial, when we start playing around with this, we're going to open up version 2. So version 3 is for you to play around with. You can click on the text in the background here, and you can go to the materials here, and you can change the strength of it. You can make it none, you can increase it, you can decrease it. Go and play around with the settings. You can play around with these and find out what they do. Just by experimenting is how you're going to learn. If you don't experiment, it's going to be difficult to learn something, right? So play around with all these settings. You can make mistakes. You can do whatever you want. There's no harm because you've got a version 3. And version 3 is what we're going to dump later. We won't really keep this version 3. We just use it as an experiment to play around with the tools and the text and see what can you do? What can you do with this text? What do all these options do? So if we remove the specular, if we remove the roughness, what will happen with this text? If we click on the floor here and we go to this, the floor doesn't have a material. No, it must have a material. Where is it? The plane. Okay, the plane doesn't have a material. It does have a material here. So that is glossy. See, if you change the roughness, even just changing this setting here, you get like this reflection happening, right? And then there's these different styles of that reflection. So there's quite a lot of ways to manipulate this this scene. You can really play around with it and just see what works. What is it you can do in here? And by playing around with these tools, you can experiment and learn from it. That's how I'm learning, so that's a good way for you to learn as well. And you're using your version 3, so you can do whatever you want. And if it doesn't look right, it doesn't matter. You can click here. We can do something like see what diffuse does. Normally we use like principal shader. That's kind of like your default. That's like your default sort of setting. Principal shader. You really got to go around and experiment with all of these different options and see what works. You've got like glass here. So this is like a glass sort of effect. And then you've got glossy. That's what the one we was using before. Let's see what that looks like when you render it out. So now you've got like this sort of neon sign and reflecting at the bottom. But you've got all these sort of artifacts in here, right? So we need to look at that and how to fix that. So I'll leave you to go and experiment. I'm going to go and play around with this software. Find out how we can improve this text, if we can improve it in any way. And we'll look at that in the next tutorial. I think it's looking pretty good at the moment. I'll probably get rid of this sort of reflection thing here. So we can do that by increasing the roughness here. And just have it like this. Or you could have it maybe just a little bit. Like something like this. So you can just about see it at the bottom there, right? So when you render, you'll see this like little reflection down here, which looks quite nice actually. Okay. Let's go to File, Save, and we'll continue from our version 2 next time. Or maybe this version 3 looks pretty good at the moment, so maybe we'll use this version. Go and play around, have fun. I'm going to close this, I'm going to stop talking, and I look forward to seeing you in the next DCP Web tutorial.